The hospital warned the black nurse about helping a homeless man. When they discovered his real identity, everyone in the emergency room stood frozen. Andre stood in the doorway of their small Bronx apartment, watching his mother Sarah passed out on the couch, still wearing her blue nurse scrubs. Her work shoes lay scattered on the floor where she'd kicked them off. The TV muttered in the background, casting flickering shadows across her exhausted face. "Mom?" he whispered, but she didn't stir. The clock on the wall showed 6:30 a.m. Another day was starting, whether they were ready or not. Andre moved quietly through their cramped living room, careful not to wake her. She'd worked a double shift again, 14 hours straight at Bronx Memorial. The morning sun crept through the thin curtains as Andre got ready for school. He pulled his wrinkled uniform from the laundry basket. They hadn't had quarters for the dryer this week. The blue polo shirt had seen better days, the collar frayed, and the color faded from countless washes. His khakis were a hand-me-down, slightly too short at the ankles. "Andre." Sarah's voice came from the living room, groggy with sleep. "Baby, what time is it?" "Morning, Mom. It's just past 6:30. Sarah sat up quickly, rubbing her face. "Oh, God. I need to get you ready for school." "It's okay, Mom. I'm already dressed." She looked at him with tired eyes, managing a small smile. "My responsible boy. Did you eat?" "Not yet. I was about to make some cereal." Sarah stood, swaying slightly from exhaustion. "Sit down. I'll make you proper breakfast." "Mom, you should sleep. I said sit." Her tone was gentle but firm. She shuffled to their small kitchen, pulling out eggs and the last pieces of bread. "You need real food, not just cereal." Andre sat at their small table, watching her cook. Even dead tired, she moved with practiced efficiency, cracking eggs one-handed into the pan. "Mrs. Rodriguez from 4B asked about piano lessons again," he said carefully. Sarah's shoulders tensed. "Andre, I told her we couldn't afford it right now." The eggs sizzled in the pan. Sarah didn't respond for a long moment. "I'm sorry, baby. I know you miss your lessons with Mr. Thompson." "It's okay, Mom. I understand." Sarah placed a plate of eggs and toast in front of him. "Eat up. You need your strength for school." Andre took a bite, but the food felt heavy in his mouth. He watched his mother grab her phone, frowning at the screen. "Everything okay?" "Just some messages from work." She tried to smile, but Andre saw the worry in her eyes. "There's talk about budget cuts at the hospital." "What does that mean?" "Nothing you need to worry about." She ruffled his hair. "Finish your breakfast. We need to leave in 20 minutes. The walk to school was quiet. Sarah's scrubs rustled with each step as they made their way down the busy Bronx streets. Street vendors were setting up their carts, the smell of coffee and pastries filling the air. Andre's stomach growled despite his breakfast. "Andre, wait up!" Marcus, his best friend, came running up behind them. His uniform was as worn as Andre's, but he wore it with easy confidence. "Morning, Mrs. Williams," Marcus said, falling in a step beside them. "Morning, Marcus. How's your mother doing?" "Better. The new medication's helping with her back." They reached the school gates, joining the stream of students flowing inside. Sarah pulled Andre aside, straightening his collar. "I might be late tonight, baby. There's leftover pasta in the fridge." "More overtime?" A shadow crossed her face. "We need the extra hours right now." "Lock up when you get home?" "Okay." "Yes, Mom." She hugged him tight, then pushed him gently toward the school. "Have a good day." "Love you." "Love you too." Andre watched her walk away, her shoulders squared despite her exhaustion. Inside the classroom, he pulled out his notebooks, secondhand like everything else, with other students' names crossed out on the covers. Ms. Parker was writing on the board when her phone buzzed. She checked it quickly, then called Andre to her desk. "Your mother asked me to give you this," she said quietly, handing him a folded note. Andre's heart sank as he read it. "Working late shift. Don't wait up for dinner. Love you." The day dragged on. In music class, Andre stared at the piano in the corner, remembering how Mr. Thompson used to teach him after school. The memory of his teacher's patient voice explaining chord progressions made his chest ache. When the final bell rang, Andre walked home alone. The apartment was empty and quiet. He heated up the pasta as instructed, ate at the kitchen table, and tried to focus on homework. Around midnight, he heard keys in the door. Sarah walked in, her scrubs wrinkled and stained with coffee. She dropped her bag by the door, surprised to see him still up. Andre? Why aren't you in bed? Couldn't sleep? He watched her sink into a chair. Mom? Are you crying? She quickly wiped her eyes. Just tired, baby. It was a long day. But Andre saw the paper she was clutching. Bills marked in red, final notices, and a letter from the hospital about staff reductions. Sarah caught him looking and quickly tucked them away. Everything's fine, she said, but her voice cracked. We're going to be fine. Andre got up and hugged her tight, feeling her shoulders shake with quiet sobs. Outside their window, the Bronx night hummed with traffic and distant sirens. Inside, a mother and son held each other, both trying to be stronger than they needed to be. The next day, Andre trudged home from school, taking the long route through the Bronx streets. His backpack felt heavier than usual, loaded with homework he wasn't sure he'd be able to focus on. His mother's tears from the night before kept replaying in his mind. A broken melody caught his attention, someone playing a harmonica off-key. Andre usually ignored the street musicians and homeless people along his route, just like his mother taught him. But something about this particular sound made him pause. The music came from a man sitting on a cardboard box outside the old convenience store. His gray beard was unkempt, and his denim jacket was dirty and torn. But his hands, they moved over the harmonica with familiar grace. Andre stopped walking. His heart began to pound. The man looked up, and Andre's breath caught in his throat. Behind the matted beard and hollow cheeks, he recognized those kind eyes. Mr. Thompson? The music stopped abruptly. The man's hands trembled, lowering the harmonica. You must be mistaken, son. His voice was rougher than Andre remembered, but unmistakable. Best move along now. Andre stepped closer, ignoring the warning. It is you. Mr. Thompson, it's me. Andre Williams, you taught me piano for 2 years before. Andre. Mr. Thompson squinted, really looking at him now. Recognition flickered across his weathered face, followed quickly by shame. He turned away. You shouldn't be here. Go home. What happened to you? After the fire, you just disappeared. We tried to find you. Please, Andre. Mr. Thompson's voice cracked. Just go. Instead, Andre sat down on the curb next to him. Up close, he could smell unwashed clothes and something medicinal. Mr. Thompson's hands shook as he tried to pocket the harmonica. You still play beautifully, Andre said quietly. A bitter laugh. This is nothing. Can't even afford a real instrument anymore. He gestured vaguely at the harmonica. Everything burned in that fire. My studio, my piano, all my students, records. Mom and I wondered if you'd moved away. She kept asking around, but nobody knew anything. Mr. Thompson's eyes grew distant. I did move away for a while. Tried to start over in Philadelphia. But medical bills piled up. Couldn't find steady work. He shook his head. Doesn't matter now. Are you sick? I'm fine. But a cough betrayed him, deep and rattling. Andre reached into his backpack, pulling out his lunch sandwich, still uneaten. Here, keep it. I don't need Dash. Please, Mr. Thompson. You taught me for 2 years. Let me help just a little. The older man stared at the sandwich for a long moment before accepting it with trembling hands. He took a small bite, then devoured it like he hadn't eaten in days. Remember when you taught me Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata? Andre asked, watching him eat. Mr. Thompson's eyes softened. You were so determined to learn it, even though it was way too advanced. Practiced until your fingers were sore. You said I was stubborn, like a mule. A ghost of his old smile appeared. But talented. You had real talent, Andre. They sat in silence for a moment, watching traffic pass. Andre noticed Mr. Thompson's shoes were falling apart, the soles held together with duct tape. My mom. Andre hesitated. She works at Bronx Memorial now. She could help Dash now. Mr. Thompson stood abruptly, gathering his few possessions. I don't need help, and you need to go home. It's getting late. But Dash, I mean it, Andre. Don't tell anyone you saw me. Especially not your mother. She has enough to worry about. How did you know? I see her sometimes, walking to work in her scrubs. Always in a hurry, always looking tired. He sighed heavily. The world's not kind to people who work hard, Andre. Remember that. Before Andre could respond, Mr. Thompson shuffled away, disappearing into the evening crowd. The broken harmonica melody lingered in Andre's mind as he walked the rest of the way home. The apartment was empty when he arrived. A note on the fridge read, "Working late again. Dinner and microwave. Love you, Mom." Andre heated up the leftovers but couldn't eat. He sat at the kitchen table, homework forgotten, remembering the 2 years of piano lessons that had meant everything to him. Mr. Thompson had never charged much, teaching kids from the neighborhood for whatever their parents could afford. Some weeks, when money was particularly tight, he taught Andre for free. The memory of his last lesson came flooding back. It was a warm spring afternoon, and he'd finally mastered the first movement of Moonlight Sonata. Mr. Thompson had been so proud, his face beaming as Andre played the final notes. "You're going to do great things, Andre," he'd said. "Music has a way of lifting people up when they need it most." 2 days later, the fire had destroyed everything. They'd heard it started in the apartment above the studio. Faulty wiring. Mr. Thompson had lost not just his business, but his home, and then he'd vanished. Andre pulled out his phone, searching for videos of Moonlight Sonata. The familiar notes filled the quiet apartment as he imagined Mr. Thompson's hands guiding his own on the keys, teaching him the proper fingering, the correct rhythm. Hours passed. Andre must have dozed off because the next thing he knew, his mother was shaking him gently. "Baby, why aren't you in bed?" He blinked, disoriented. Sarah looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes. Her scrubs had a coffee stain on the front. "Mom, I need to tell you something. Can it wait until morning? I just worked 16 hours. I saw Mr. Thompson today." Sarah froze in the act of taking off her shoes. "What?" "He's homeless, Mom. Living on the street. He's sick, and he won't let anyone help him." "Andre." Sarah sank into a chair. "Are you sure it was him?" "Positive. He recognized me too, but he tried to pretend he didn't. He looks so different now, thin and tired. But it's definitely him." Sarah ran a hand through her hair, her expression troubled. "Where did you see him?" "By the old convenience store on Webster. He was playing harmonica." Andre's voice cracked. "Mom, we have to help him. He's really sick. I could hear it in his breathing." "It's not that simple, baby." "Why not? You're a nurse. You help people all the time, and the hospital is already threatening cuts." "I can't risk Dash." She stopped herself, taking a deep breath. "We'll figure something out. But right now, you need to sleep. It's after midnight." Andre wanted to argue, but he saw the exhaustion in his mother's face. He hugged her goodnight and went to his room, but sleep wouldn't come. Through the thin walls, he heard his mother making phone calls in whispered tones, trying to find resources for homeless people, asking about free clinics. In the darkness, Andre made a decision. Tomorrow he would go back to the convenience store. And this time, he wouldn't leave until Mr. Thompson accepted help. He owed his teacher that much. The sound of Sarah crying quietly in the next room followed him into uneasy dreams, mixing with the broken melody of a harmonica playing Moonlight Sonata. The morning light hadn't yet touched the Bronx streets when Sarah made her first call. She paced the small kitchen, phone pressed to her ear, speaking in hushed tones to avoid waking Andre. "Yes, I understand you're full." "No, he's not violent. A former music teacher." "Yes, I'll hold." She scribbled notes on a pad, crossing out shelters that were already at capacity. 3 hours into her morning off, and she had nothing to show for it. Andre shuffled into the kitchen, still in his pajamas. "Any luck?" Sarah jumped, nearly dropping the phone. "I thought you were sleeping. Couldn't—" He opened the fridge, staring at its meager contents. "Are you going to help him?" Before Sarah could answer, a voice crackled through the phone. She turned away, speaking urgently. "Yes, I'm still here. What do you mean there's a 6-month waiting list?" The door buzzed. Andre went to answer it, finding Mrs. Rodriguez from 4B standing there with her arms crossed. "Tell your mama I saw that homeless man again," she said without preamble. "He's been hanging around the convenience store, talking to kids. It's not safe." "He's not dangerous," Andre protested. "He's Dash, Andre." Sarah appeared behind him, ending her call. "Go get dressed for school." "But Mom, Dash now, please." Andre retreated to his room, but pressed his ear to the door. "Sarah, you need to call the police," Mrs. Rodriguez was saying. "We can't have these people in our neighborhood. My Eduardo says he's been there for days." He's sick and needs help, Sarah replied firmly. Calling the police won't solve anything. You're too soft-hearted. First thing you know, more will come. Then what? Andre heard his mother's controlled sigh. Thank you for letting me know, Mrs. Rodriguez. I'll handle it. The door closed. Andre emerged from his room, fully dressed. She's wrong about Mr. Thompson. I know, baby. Sarah checked her watch. We need to hurry. I have a meeting with Dr. Richards before my shift. They walked quickly through the awakening neighborhood. Street vendors nodded to them, familiar with their daily routine. Sarah kept checking her phone, frowning at messages. Mom? Andre hesitated. I saved some of my lunch money. Maybe we could dash. Andre, listen to me. Sarah stopped walking, kneeling to meet his eyes. What happened to Mr. Thompson is terrible, but we have to be careful. The hospital has strict policies about staff getting involved with street cases. But you help people all the time, inside the hospital with proper procedures. This is different. She straightened his collar. Promise me you won't go near him alone again. Andre looked away. Andre, fine. I promise. But they both knew he didn't mean it. At school, Andre couldn't focus. During lunch, he wrapped his sandwich carefully, hiding it in his backpack. Marcus noticed. You're not eating again? Not hungry. Is it about that homeless guy? Eduardo told me, Dash. His name is Mr. Thompson. Andre snapped. He taught me piano for 2 years. Marcus fell silent, picking at his own lunch. My mom says people end up on the street because of drugs. She's wrong. He lost everything in a fire. Then why doesn't he get help? Andre didn't have an answer. After school, he took the long way home again. Mr. Thompson sat in his usual spot, but something was wrong. His breathing was labored, and he barely lifted his head when Andre approached. You shouldn't be here, he wheezed. I brought you something. Andre pulled out the sandwich. Mr. Thompson tried to wave it away, but a coughing fit doubled him over. The sound was worse than yesterday, wet and rattling. You need a doctor? Can't afford it. Mr. Thompson spat into a dirty handkerchief. Andre saw flecks of red. My mom works at the hospital. She can dash. No hospitals. He struggled to his feet, swaying. Just need rest. Mr. Thompson? The older man took 2 steps and collapsed. Andre's phone was in his hand instantly. Mom? Mom, he fell. He's not getting up. Please come quick. Sarah's voice sharpened with worry. Where are you? Outside the convenience store. Mom, there's blood when he coughs. Don't touch him. I'm coming. Call 911 right now. Andre made the call with shaking hands. A crowd began to gather. He heard Mrs. Rodriguez's voice. I told them he was trouble. He's not trouble. Andre shouted. He's sick. Sirens wailed in the distance. Mr. Thompson stirred, trying to get up. Have to get away. Please stay still, Andre begged. Help is coming. No. Can't pay. Sarah arrived before the ambulance, still in her scrubs. She took one look at Mr. Thompson and pulled on latex gloves from her pocket. Sir? I'm a nurse. Can you hear me? Mr. Thompson's eyes flickered. Sarah? Sarah Williams. Yes. Your student's mother. Remember? Don't let them. Take me. You need help. Your lungs don't sound good. The ambulance pulled up. 2 EMTs jumped out with a stretcher. Sarah spoke rapidly, giving them vitals and symptoms, BPs dropping. One said, We need to move. I'm coming with you, Sarah announced. Ma'am, unless your family dash, she held up her hospital ID. I'm a nurse at Bronx Memorial, and I'm not leaving him. The EMT hesitated, then nodded. Andre, go straight home, Sarah ordered. Call Marcus's mom. Stay with him until I call. But Mom dash now Andre. He watched them load Mr. Thompson into the ambulance. Sarah climbed in after, already calling the hospital on her phone. As the sirens faded, Andre heard Mrs. Rodriguez talking to other neighbors. She's risking her job for a homeless man. With the hospital making cuts, Marcus appeared at his side. Come on, my mom's waiting. At Marcus's apartment, Andre sat by the window, watching the street below. Hours passed. His phone remained silent. Finally, near midnight, Sarah called. How is he? His mother's voice was tired. Pneumonia, severe malnutrition, and possible TB. He's in isolation, but he'll be okay. A long pause. I don't know, baby. Listen, Dr. Richards saw me bring him in. There's going to be a review tomorrow. What does that mean? It means I might be in trouble. But don't worry about that. Just stay at Marcus's tonight. I'll pick you up in the morning. Mom? Yes. You did the right thing. Another pause. I hope so, baby. I hope so. Andre lay awake on Marcus's couch, remembering Mr. Thompson's face when he collapsed, the fear, the shame, the resignation. In the dark, he whispered a prayer his mother had taught him. Lord, help those who help others. Across the city, in a sterile hospital room, machines beeped steadily as Mr. Thompson fought for breath. And somewhere in between, Sarah Williams sat in an empty break room, staring at a disciplinary notice and wondering if compassion was worth the cost of survival. The fluorescent lights of Bronx Memorial's emergency room cast harsh shadows across Sarah's face as she stood before Dr. Richards' desk at 6 a.m. Her scrubs were wrinkled from the night shift, dark circles under her eyes. Do you understand what you've done? Dr. Richards didn't look up from the incident report. Bringing in a homeless man with no ID, no insurance, no next of kin, he needed immediate medical attention. He needed to go through proper channels. Dr. Richards finally looked up, his expression hard. We're facing budget cuts, Sarah. We can't afford charity cases. Sarah gripped the back of the chair in front of her. He has severe pneumonia and possible tuberculosis. The proper channels would have taken days, and now he's in our isolation ward, taking up a bed we can't bill for. He tapped the report. You violated at least 3 hospital policies. I did my job. As a nurse. As a nurse, your job is to follow protocols. He sighed, rubbing his temples. The board meets at noon. Until then, you're suspended. Suspended? But my patients will be reassigned. Hand over your badge. Sarah's hands shook as she unpinned her ID. The badge felt heavier than usual as she placed it on his desk. What about Mr. Thompson? The patient will receive standard care until we can transfer him to a public facility. He's not stable enough for transfer. Dr. Richards' phone buzzed. He checked it, frowning. We're done here, Sarah. Go home. She walked out of his office in a daze. The emergency room was already filling with morning cases. A child with a fever, an elderly man clutching his chest, a pregnant woman in early labor. Her patients. Her responsibility. Mom. Andre sat in the waiting area, still wearing yesterday's clothes. Marcus's mother, Mrs. Carter, stood beside him. Andre? I told you to stay at Marcus's. I had to come. He hugged her tight. How's Mr. Thompson? Sarah looked at Mrs. Carter apologetically. Thank you for bringing him. I'm sorry for the trouble. No trouble. Mrs. Carter squeezed her shoulder. You did what anyone with a heart would do. A commotion near the isolation ward drew their attention. 2 security guards rushed past, followed by Dr. Richards and several nurses. Stay here, Sarah told Andre, but he was already following her. They reached Mr. Thompson's room as an elderly man in an expensive suit pushed past security. His silver hair was perfectly styled, his Italian leather shoes clicking on the linoleum. Where is he? The man's voice carried authority. Where's my son? Dr. Richards stepped forward. Sir, this is a restricted area. My name is William Thompson Sr., and I'm here for James Thompson Jr. He pulled out a photograph. We've been searching for him for 3 years. The room fell silent. Sarah stared at the photo. A younger, healthier version of her patient stood smiling next to the well-dressed man, both wearing suits at what looked like a Wall Street event. James Thompson Jr. Dr. Richards' tone changed completely. Of Thompson Investment Group? My son. William Thompson's voice cracked. We hired private investigators, searched everywhere after he disappeared. He turned to Sarah. The hospital called about his admission. Are you the nurse who brought him in? Sarah nodded mutely. Thank God. He grabbed her hand. Thank God you found him. Andre tugged at Sarah's scrubs. Mom? What's happening? Before she could answer, alarms blared from Mr. Thompson's room. Sarah's nursing instincts took over. She rushed in, ignoring Dr. Richards' protests. Mr. Thompson James was struggling to breathe, the oxygen monitor showing dangerously low levels. His eyes opened, focusing on his father in the doorway. Dad? His voice was barely a whisper. James? William Thompson tried to approach, but a nurse held him back. He's still in isolation, Sarah explained, checking vitals. Possible tuberculosis. I don't care. He's my son. BP dropping, a nurse called out. Get a crash cart. Sarah barked orders, falling into the rhythm she knew best. He's going into respiratory distress. The next hours passed in a blur of medical procedures. Sarah worked alongside the same staff who had been ready to ostracize her that morning. Now, with a billionaire son under their care, no expense was spared. Andre watched through the window as his mother helped save her former friend's life. He saw Dr. Richards hovering nearby, his earlier hostility replaced by nervous attention. By evening, Mr. Thompson's condition had stabilized. Sarah finally stepped out of isolation, exhausted but relieved. He's asking for you, she told William Thompson. But you'll need to wear protective gear. As the father donned a gown and mask, Sarah felt Andre's hand slip into hers. Did you know, he asked, about Mr. Thompson being rich? No, baby. She watched William Thompson enter his son's room. But it shouldn't matter. Everyone deserves care. Dr. Richards approached, looking uncomfortable. Sarah, about this morning dash, save it. She straightened her shoulders. I have patients to check on. Unless I'm still suspended? He flushed. No, of course not. In fact, the board would like to commend your quick action and dedication. How convenient. She turned away from him, addressing Andre. Ready to go home? Can I say goodbye to Mr. Thompson first? Sarah hesitated, then nodded. They suited up in protective gear and entered the room. William Thompson stood back, letting them approach. Mr. Thompson looked small against the white hospital sheets, tubes, and monitors surrounding him. But his eyes were clearer than they'd been in days. Andre, he managed a weak smile. I'm sorry you had to see me like this. I'm just glad you're okay. Andre's voice shook. Why didn't you tell us? About your family? Shame? Mr. Thompson glanced at his father. I made some mistakes. Lost my way. Thought it was better to disappear. No, son. William Thompson's voice was rough with emotion. Nothing is better than having you alive. Sarah checked the monitors one last time. We should let him rest. As they turned to leave, Mr. Thompson caught her hand. Sarah, thank you. For not giving up on me? She squeezed his hand gently. That's what friends do. In the hallway, they removed their protective gear. Hospital staff hurried past, their attitudes notably different from that morning. Sarah saw Mrs. Rodriguez from their building talking to a nurse, probably spreading the news about the homeless man's true identity. Mom? Andre yawned, the long day catching up with him. What happens now? Sarah watched William Thompson make a phone call, his relief visible even through the isolation room window. Now we go home, baby. Tomorrow will take care of itself. But as they walked out of the hospital, Sarah noticed reporters gathering at the entrance. Someone had leaked the story. The prodigal son of Wall Street found homeless in the Bronx, saved by a black nurse who defied hospital policy. She pulled Andre closer, shielding him from the cameras. Tomorrow would indeed take care of itself, but she had a feeling their lives were about to change in ways she couldn't predict. In his hospital bed, James Thompson Jr. finally slept peacefully, his father keeping vigil. The stigma of homelessness had vanished with his true identity, replaced by whispers of a tragic prodigal son story. But Sarah knew the truth. He was the same man who had taught her son music, who had shown kindness when they could barely afford lessons. Money hadn't made him more worthy of dignity. It had just made others more willing to give it. Sarah sat at her kitchen table at 3 a.m., her laptop's glow illuminating dozens of news articles about the Thompson family. Coffee grew cold beside her as she read. Thompson Heirs' mysterious disappearance rocks Wall Street. James Thompson Jr. The $500 million fortune he left behind. Thompson Investment Group struggles after Heirs' departure. The door creaked. Andre padded into the kitchen, rubbing his eyes. Can't sleep? She asked. He shook his head, pulling up a chair. Reading about Mr. Thompson? Trying to understand? She turned the screen so he could see. He walked away from all of this 3 years ago, right after the market crash. Why? Sarah clicked another article. According to this, Thompson Investment Group was involved in some risky trades. They lost a lot of people's money. She scrolled down. But they survived. Other companies didn't. Is that why he left? Maybe. She closed the laptop. You should be sleeping. You have school tomorrow. Mom? Andre didn't move. There are reporters outside our building. Sarah sighed. She'd seen them earlier, camping out on the sidewalk, hoping for a statement about the homeless billionaire she'd saved. Ignore them. This'll blow over soon. Her phone buzzed. Another message from the hospital board. They wanted a meeting first thing in the morning. Her suspension was officially lifted, but something in their tone made her uneasy. Andre watched her face. Are you in trouble? No, baby. Everything's fine. She forced a smile. Go back to bed. But sleep didn't come for either of them. At dawn, they walked to school together, dodging reporters' questions. The normally quiet street buzzed with activity. News vans, photographers, curious onlookers. Mrs. Williams. A reporter shoved a microphone toward them. Did you know James Thompson Jr.? His identity when you admitted him. No comment. Sarah pulled Andre closer. Is it true you risked your job to help him? How does it feel to be called a hero? They rushed past, but not before hearing a photographer mutter. Black nurse saves white billionaire. Perfect story. At school, Andre couldn't focus. Kids whispered when he passed, sharing links to news stories on their phones. During lunch, Marcus showed him a viral video of Sarah helping Mr. Thompson into the ambulance. Your mom's famous, Marcus said. She doesn't want to be. Back at the hospital, Sarah faced the board. The same administrators who'd been ready to fire her now smiled warmly. Nurse Williams, Dr. Richards gestured to a chair. Thank you for joining us. Like I had a choice. We want to discuss your future here at Bronx Memorial. My future. Sarah's voice hardened. Yesterday, you suspended me. A misunderstanding. Dr. Richards smiled thinly. In fact, we'd like to commend your quick thinking and dedication. The Thompson family is very grateful. They're not the only patients who deserve care. Of course not. He slid a paper across the desk. We're offering you a promotion. Head nurse in our new private care wing. Sarah stared at the salary figure. It was triple what she currently made. Why? You've proven yourself capable of handling high-profile cases. You mean rich ones? The room grew tense. A board member cleared her throat. Sarah, this is an opportunity. Think of your son. Her phone buzzed. A text from Andre. Mr. Thompson's asking for you. I need to check on my patient. She stood. Sarah Dash, I'll think about it. In the isolation ward, she found William Thompson Sr. pacing outside his son's room. Nurse Williams, he looked haggard despite his expensive suit. James wants to explain. About everything. Inside, Mr. Thompson sat propped up in bed, looking stronger but still frail. Sarah, his voice was clearer today. Andre's mother. I should have told you both. You didn't owe us explanations. I did. I do. He gripped his blanket. That crash in 21, we knew the risks. Told clients their investments were safe when they weren't. The articles mentioned that. Articles don't tell everything. There was a woman, Maria Gonzalez, retired teacher, lost everything. His voice cracked. She killed herself. Left a note blaming our company. Sarah sat in the visitor's chair, remembering the gentle man who'd taught Andre piano. I couldn't face it. The guilt. Dad wanted to handle it with lawyers and PR. He looked at his father. I just walked away. Changed my phone. Cut all contacts. For 3 years, figured I deserved it. Living rough. Helping kids when I could. Teaching music. He smiled weakly. Until I got sick. Pride's a deadly thing, Sarah. William Thompson stepped closer. Son, we looked everywhere. Hired investigators. I know, Dad. I saw them sometimes. Kept moving. Sarah checked his vitals, processing this information. The fire at your studio. Insurance lapsed. I'd stopped paying bills by then. He coughed. Cosmic justice. Maybe. No. Sarah's voice was firm. Nobody deserves to suffer. Not even people who make mistakes. Her phone buzzed again. The hospital board was waiting. I should go. Sarah? Mr. Thompson caught her arm. They're offering you things, aren't they? Because of who I am. She nodded. Take them. Use them. God knows this place needs nurses who actually care. It's not that simple. It never is. He released her arm. But Andre deserves opportunities. Music lessons. College. Outside the room, William Thompson stopped her. My son's right. Let us help you. I didn't help him for rewards. No. You helped because it was right? He pressed a business card into her hand. That's exactly why you deserve them. Sarah walked through the hospital corridors, feeling eyes on her. Nurses who'd ignored her yesterday now smiled eagerly. Dr. Richards hovered near the nurses' station, waiting. Her phone buzzed one more time. Andre had sent a photo, him at the school piano, grinning. The caption read, "Music teacher says I can practice at lunch." Just like old times, Sarah fingered the business card in her pocket, thinking of opportunities, of justice, of cosmic balance. The promotion letter sat in her locker, waiting for her signature. But first, she had patients to check on. Regular people, unimportant people, people who deserved just as much care as any billionaire's son. The truth about Mr. Thompson had changed everything and nothing. She was still a nurse, still a mother, still someone who believed that every human life had value, regardless of the numbers in their bank account. She tucked the business card away and picked up her first chart of the day. The patient was an elderly woman with pneumonia, no insurance, no famous name. "Good morning," Sarah said, entering the room with a smile. "I'm your nurse. How are you feeling today?" Some truths, she knew, were simpler than others. Some choices clearer. Some paths straighter, even if they were harder to walk. In the isolation ward, father and son began the long process of reconciliation. In the school music room, a boy rediscovered the joy of piano keys under his fingers. And in a humble hospital room, a nurse did her job, knowing that sometimes the biggest truths come disguised as the smallest acts of kindness. Dr. Richards stood at the head of the conference table, his face flushed with frustration. "Sarah, this is the third time you've refused to transfer your regular patients to make room for private referrals." Sarah sat straight-backed in her chair, ignoring the stares from other administrators. "My patients are stable, but not ready for transfer. The Thompson family has specifically requested you oversee their private wing. I haven't accepted that position. This isn't just about you anymore." He slapped a newspaper on the table. The headline read, "Bronx Angel. Nurse's compassion saves billionaire's son." "I didn't ask for this publicity, but we have it. And with it, opportunities for this hospital." He leaned forward. "Do you know how many wealthy donors have called since this story broke?" Sarah's phone vibrated. A text from Andre. "Mom, Mr. Thompson's cough is worse. Nurses won't listen." "Excuse me," she stood. "My patient needs me. We're not finished. Yes, we are." She strode through the halls, passing a construction crew measuring spaces for the new private wing. Her regular patients watched from their rooms, whispering as she passed. They'd seen the news too. In the isolation ward, she found Andre sitting beside Mr. Thompson's bed. The heart monitor beeped erratically. "What happened?" "Tried to walk." Mr. Thompson wheezed between words. "Too soon." Sarah checked his oxygen levels. "Who authorized this?" "New doctor." Andre pointed to unfamiliar orders on the chart. "Said he was ready, without consulting his primary physician." Sarah's voice rose. "Where's the staff nurse?" "Busy. With private patients." Mr. Thompson grabbed her hand. "Sarah, don't." But she was already hitting the call button. When no one responded, she stormed to the nurse's station. "Who changed Mr. Thompson's care orders?" A young nurse looked up nervously. "Dr. Peterson from private care. He's handling all the Thompson cases now." "Since when?" "Administrative decision. This morning." Sarah's hands shook as she dialed Dr. Richards' extension. His secretary answered. "He's in a donor meeting. Get him. Now." Minutes later, Dr. Richards arrived with a silver-haired man in an expensive suit. "Sarah, we're in the middle of You transferred my patient without notice?" "Mr. Thompson is a private case now. He's in isolation with severe pneumonia." Her voice echoed through the hall. "You can't just change protocols because his family has money." The donor shifted uncomfortably. Dr. Richards forced a smile. "Let's discuss this in private." "No." "You want publicity? Let's give him something to write about." She grabbed Mr. Thompson's chart. "Patient with active TB symptoms, cleared for walking. No respiratory therapy consult. No follow-up cultures. Sarah you're risking his life to impress donors." Security guards approached. Dr. Richards nodded to them. "Nurse Williams needs a break." "Don't touch me." Sarah backed away. I'm filing a formal complaint with the medical board. Think carefully. Dr. Richards' voice dropped. About your son's future. Andre stepped out of Mr. Thompson's room. Mom, it's okay, baby. But her voice cracked. William Thompson appeared from the elevator, taking in the scene. What's happening here? Mr. Thompson. Dr. Richards straightened. Just a small staffing issue. They're trying to force Mom out, Andre blurted. Is this true? William Thompson's expression hardened. Sir, we're simply restructuring for optimal care by removing the nurse who saved my son's life. The donor edged away from Dr. Richards. Sarah felt tears burning, but held them back. I just want to do my job. Your job? Dr. Richards snapped. Your job is to follow orders. We've tolerated your attitude because of the Thompson situation, but tolerated? William Thompson's voice could have frozen fire. My son nearly died because hospitals like yours prioritize profit over people. Sarah was the only one who saw him as human. Mr. Thompson, please understand, Oh, I understand perfectly. He pulled out his phone. I'm calling my lawyers. And the press. The color drained from Dr. Richards' face. That won't be necessary, I think it is. William Thompson turned to Sarah. Unless you prefer to handle this internally? She looked at Andre, at her patients watching from their doorways, at the staff holding their breath. No. Her voice strengthened. The public should know what happens to patients without money or influence. Mom? Andre tugged her sleeve. What about your job? Some things matter more. The next hours passed in a blur. Lawyers arrived. Reporters gathered outside. Sarah sat in meeting after meeting, telling her story, not just about Mr. Thompson, but about every patient denied care, every corner cut, every life deemed less valuable. By evening, Dr. Richards was suspended pending investigation. Sarah's phone overflowed with messages from other nurses sharing similar stories. She found Andre in Mr. Thompson's room, playing chess on a tablet. Checkmate again, Mr. Thompson smiled weakly. He's getting better. Mom? Andre looked up. Are we okay? Sarah sat heavily in the visitor's chair. I don't know, baby, but we did the right thing. You always do. Mr. Thompson's breathing was steadier now. That's why they're scared of you. I'm not trying to scare anyone. No, you're just showing them what real healthcare looks like. He moved his chess piece. Your move, Andre. William Thompson appeared in the doorway. Sarah? The board wants to speak with you. I assume I'm fired? Actually, he smiled slightly. They're offering you Dr. Richards' job. The room fell silent, except for the steady beep of monitors. Head of Emergency Services, he continued, with full authority to implement reforms. Why? Because sometimes doing the right thing is good business. He handed her a folder. And because my family's foundation just became the hospital's largest donor. With conditions, Sarah opened the folder. The proposed changes were everything she'd fought for. Expanded free care, better staffing ratios, community outreach programs. You don't have to accept, Mr. Thompson said from his bed. But think of the good you could do. Andre squeezed her hand. She thought of her patients, of other nurses fighting the same battles, of kids like Andre who deserved better. When do I start? The machines kept beeping, marking time in a room where everything had changed. Outside, reporters still waited for their story. But the real story wasn't about a homeless billionaire or a nurse who saved him. It was about a system that needed fixing, about people who refused to look away, about the simple truth that every life has value. Andre reset the chessboard, pieces clicking into place like the pieces of their lives, rearranging into something new but somehow familiar. Your move, Mom, he said. And for the first time in days, Sarah Williams smiled, knowing exactly what move to make next. The morning sun filtered through the isolation room's window, casting long shadows across James Thompson's bed. His father sat in the visitor's chair, both men still in protective gear, the silence between them heavy with 3 years of absence. The company survived, William Thompson said finally. After you left. I know. James adjusted his oxygen tube. I check the stock prices sometimes. At internet cafes. While living on the streets? Needed to know. He coughed slightly. That I hadn't destroyed everything. You nearly destroyed yourself. William's voice cracked. Why didn't you come home? Before James could answer, Sarah entered with his morning medications. She noticed the tension and moved efficiently, giving them space. BP's better today, she said, checking monitors. Fever's down. Sarah. James caught her arm. Stay. Please. You should hear this too. She glanced at her watch. Her first administrative meeting as head of emergency services started in 20 minutes. 5 minutes, she agreed. James took a shaky breath. Remember that teacher I told you about? Maria Gonzalez? The one who... William couldn't finish. She came to me first. Before. James gripped his blanket. Begged me to tell her where her money went. Said she had nothing left. Son dash. I told her to talk to our lawyers. His voice broke. Corporate protocol. That's what we called basic humanity by then. Sarah checked his pulse. Elevated but steady. 2 days later, her daughter called. Said she'd left a note. James looked at his father. Remember what you said? These things happen in finance. William flinched. That's when I knew. James continued. We'd lost something worse than money. So you punished yourself? William leaned forward. Lived like a vagrant? Taught music to poor kids? No, Dad. I started living honestly for the first time. He smiled weakly at Sarah. Helping people who needed it. No corporate protocols. A knock interrupted them. Andre peeked in, wearing a paper mask. Mom? The board's waiting. Coming, baby? She turned to James. Rest. No more walking without supervision. In the hallway, Andre matched her quick stride. Was Mr. Thompson crying? Healing hurts sometimes. She straightened her new blazer. Ready for school? Can I come to your meetings? Nice try. The hospital corridors felt different now. Staff nodded respectfully, but the fake smiles were gone. News of Dr. Richards' suspension had spread, along with rumors of coming changes. The boardroom fell silent as Sarah entered. Familiar faces watched her take the seat Dr. Richards had occupied yesterday. First item, she opened her folder. Review of admission policies. Sarah, a board member, interrupted. About the Thompson situation dash. James Thompson was admitted under my authority as head of emergency services. Her voice carried new weight. Any questions about his case can be directed to the hospital's legal team. She saw respect replace doubt in several eyes. Now, admission policies. The meeting ran long. By lunch, Sarah had pushed through 3 policy changes and started 2 internal reviews. Her phone buzzed with a text from Andre. Mr. T's teaching me piano in the ward. But don't worry. Wearing mask. She smiled, then turned back to budget reports. Numbers that once terrified her now made sense. The shell game of moving resources from poor patients to rich ones, of calling basic care charity. A nurse knocked urgently. Ms. Williams? There's a situation in isolation. Sarah ran, heart pounding. But when she reached James's room, she heard music. Andre sat at a portable keyboard someone had brought in. James Thompson, still in bed but sitting straighter, guided his hands through chord progressions. William Thompson watched from the corner, eyes wet. Remember this one? James asked. Andre nodded, starting the opening notes of Moonlight Sonata. Better than I taught you, James smiled. Mom made me practice. Andre didn't miss a beat, even after you left. Said music matters. Smart woman, your mother. Sarah leaned against the doorframe, watching her son play. 3 years of scraping together practice time on school pianos, of keeping music alive when they could barely afford food. William Thompson joined her. The foundation approved all funding requests. That was fast. Money moves quickly when conscience drives it. He handed her a document. Full scholarships for neighborhood kids. Music program, college prep, mentoring, estate sale paid for it. James called from his bed. Turns out I didn't need 3 houses. Or the yacht, William added dryly. Sarah reviewed the document. The numbers were staggering. Why? Because you showed us what real value looks like. William watched his son teaching Andre. Not stock prices. Not corporate protocols. Just this. The music filled the room. Teacher and student. Father and son. Past and future flowing together in melodies that needed no words. Sarah's phone buzzed. The board wanted more meetings. Policies needed updating. Staff needed training. The work of changing a broken system had only begun. But for now, She let the music wash over her. Let herself feel the weight lift from her shoulders, note by note. Mom? Andre looked up from the keys. Want to learn? I don't know how. Everyone can learn, James said. That's the point. She sat beside her son on the piano bench. His small fingers guided hers to the keys, just as James had once guided his. Start here, Andre said. Press gently. The note rang clear and true, like hope breaking through clouds, like healing finding its way home. In his bed, James Thompson watched his father watching him. Years of pain and pride melted into something simpler. The quiet joy of being found, of being known, of being forgiven. Outside the isolation room, the hospital hummed with activity. Patients needed care. Systems needed changing. Lives needed saving. But here, in this moment, the music said everything that mattered. About second chances. About real wealth. About the courage to begin again. Andre played the next chord. Sarah followed. And somewhere between the notes, a future they couldn't yet see took shape, built on nothing more complicated than the truth that every soul has value, every life its own precious melody. The song continued, and they let it carry them forward, one note at a time. Sarah sat in her new office, watching the early morning sun hit the Bronx streets below. The nameplate on her desk still felt strange. Sarah Williams, Director of Emergency Services. A knock interrupted her thoughts. Mrs. Rodriguez stood in the doorway, wringing her hands. Come in, Sarah said. My Eduardo. Mrs. Rodriguez's voice trembled. The doctors yesterday said his insurance won't cover dash. Sit down. Sarah pulled out Eduardo's file. We're not turning anyone away anymore. But how can I pay? New hospital policy. Sarah stamped the form. Income-based care program. Your family qualifies. Mrs. Rodriguez started crying. 2 months ago, she'd warned others about the homeless man at the convenience store. Now she sat in Sarah's office, learning that the same man's family would help pay for her son's treatment. I was wrong about him, she whispered. About you? We've all been wrong sometimes. Sarah handed her tissues. Eduardo's surgery is scheduled for Thursday. Down in isolation, James Thompson was having his final chest x-ray. The tuberculosis tests had come back negative, just severe pneumonia complicated by malnutrition. Looking good, the technician said. You'll be out of isolation soon, ready to face the world? William Thompson asked from the doorway. James adjusted his hospital gown. Parts of it. The press is still asking for interviews. Let them ask. James watched a group of kids walk past his room, carrying instrument cases. The music program starts today? William nodded. 20 students. Full scholarships. Andre helping? Teaching the beginners. William smiled. That boy has a gift. In the hospital's newly renovated community room, Andre sat at the piano, surrounded by eager faces. These kids wore the same worn uniforms he did, carried the same secondhand backpacks. Like this, he demonstrated a simple scale. 5 fingers, 5 keys. A small girl tried to copy him. Her tongue stuck out in concentration. Good. Andre grinned. Now try with both hands. The door opened. Sarah peeked in, watching her son teach. Pride swelled in her chest. Her phone buzzed. The hospital board was meeting to review her latest proposals. Expanded emergency services, preventive care programs, community health education. They'll approve them, a voice said behind her. Dr. Peterson, the private care doctor who'd tried to rush James's recovery, stood there awkwardly. How do you know? Because you were right. He shifted uncomfortably. About everything. In the community room, music filled the air, some notes wrong, some right, all honest. I need experienced doctors for the new clinics, Sarah said. People willing to work in the community. I'd like to apply. He met her eyes. If you'll have me. Before she could answer, her phone buzzed again. James Thompson was asking for her. She found him sitting up in bed, color finally returning to his face. Moving day tomorrow, he said. Your father's house? For now. He fiddled with his blanket. Sarah, I need a favor. What kind? The foundation board. He took a deep breath. We need someone who understands both sides. Rich and poor. Healthcare from the ground up. She understood immediately. I have a job. You'll keep it. This is advisory. Helping direct resources where they're really needed. Like music programs? Like everything? He gestured at the hospital around them. This is just the start. Through the window, they could see William Thompson talking to reporters. The story had evolved not just about a homeless billionaire found, but about a broken system being fixed. People are calling you a hero, James said. Sarah watched Andre lead his students through another scale. I'm just a nurse? No. James smiled. You're a changemaker. That's why they're scared of you. Who's scared? Other hospitals. Insurance companies. People who profit from the broken parts. Her phone buzzed yet again. The board had approved everything. All her proposals, all her reforms. They're not scared, she said. They're ready for change. In the community room, Andre started teaching Moonlight Sonata to an advanced student. The same piece that had marked beginnings and endings in their lives. Mrs. Rodriguez passed by with Eduardo, heading for pre-op consultation. She waved at Sarah, no trace of her former judgment. Dr. Peterson stood in the clinic doorway, already wearing the community health team badge. And somewhere in the city, Maria Gonzalez's daughter was receiving an invitation to join the hospital's patient advocacy board. Her mother's story becoming part of the change it had sparked. James watched it all from his bed, his father by his side, the wall between them crumbling note by note. Tomorrow, he said quietly. Scared? Sarah asked. Terrified? He smiled. But ready? Sarah checked his vitals one last time. Strong, steady healing. Like the hospital, like the community, like hope taking root in concrete. You'll need follow-up care, she said professionally. And you'll need foundation board meetings. Sounds like we're stuck with each other. Sounds like family. Outside, the music played on. Inside, the monitors beeped steadily. And everywhere, change moved like sunlight through windows, unstoppable, illuminating real. Andre's voice carried down the hall. Try again. Music takes time. Sarah smiled. Everything worth doing took time. Her phone buzzed one more time. Board meeting tomorrow. Final agenda. Building a better hospital. She typed back. We already are. The sun climbed higher over the Bronx, touching everything. The rich and poor, the healers and healing, the past and future, with the same warm light. In the community room, 20 kids played 20 different melodies that somehow made a single song. And in room 412, a former billionaire and a nurse who'd saved more than his life watched the world change, one note at a time. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. But today, in this moment, the music said everything that needed saying. Andre's voice again. That's it. You've got it. Yes, Sarah thought. We've all got it now. The simple truth that had started everything. Every life has value. Every soul can sing. Every broken thing can be made whole again. One patient at a time. One policy at a time. One note at a time. Until the song becomes a symphony. 1 month later, Sarah stood in the emergency room of Bronx Memorial, watching the morning shift change. New faces mixed with old ones. Community doctors working alongside private care specialists. No difference in how they treated patients rich or poor. Ms. Williams, a young nurse approached. The clinic's full already. Open the overflow area. Sarah checked the waiting room. No one gets turned away. Yes, ma'am. Her phone buzzed with a text from James. Board meeting at 2. Don't be late. She smiled, remembering the James Thompson she'd found on the street just weeks ago. Now he was back at his father's company, but with a different mission. The Thompson Foundation had already funded 3 community health centers across the Bronx. Mom, Andre burst through the emergency room doors, still wearing his school uniform. Did you forget? Sarah checked her watch. Your recital. It's in an hour. I didn't forget. She grabbed her coat. Let me finish one thing. They walked to her office, passing the new community care wing. Through the windows, they saw Dr. Peterson teaching a diabetes management class. Mrs. Rodriguez sat in the front row, taking notes. Remember when she was scared of Mr. Thompson? Andre asked. People change. Sarah unlocked her office. When you give them a chance. On her desk, the morning paper featured another article about Bronx Memorial's transformation. The headline read, Community Hospital Sets New Standard for Healthcare Equity. Ready? She grabbed her keys. Wait. Andre pulled out a wrinkled program. Look who's coming. Sarah read the guest list for the children's music recital. Among the parents and teachers, one name stood out: Maria Gonzalez's daughter. James invited her, Andre explained. Said she should see what her mom's story helped create. The recital hall was packed when they arrived. James and William Thompson sat in the front row, both in casual clothes instead of suits. No reporters, no cameras, just family and community. Andre disappeared backstage with the other students. Sarah found her seat next to James. Nervous? She asked. More than he is? James smiled. How's the hospital? Busy. Your foundation's programs are bringing in more patients than we expected. Good kind of problem. The lights dimmed. On stage, 20 kids from the neighborhood sat at keyboards, with Andre at the grand piano in the center. Ladies and gentlemen, the music teacher announced, please welcome our first community music program class. Andre started playing. The other students joined in, creating a simple but beautiful harmony. Sarah recognized the piece, an arrangement of Moonlight Sonata for beginners. In the audience, Maria Gonzalez's daughter wiped her eyes. William Thompson squeezed his son's shoulder, and Sarah watched her son lead these children, kids who might never have touched a piano without this program, through their first public performance. The music swelled, not perfect but real, like healing, like change, like hope. After the recital, they gathered in the community room. Kids showed their parents what they'd learned. Teachers talked with families. The walls between rich and poor, helper and helped, blurred and faded. Sarah, James pulled her aside. The foundation board approved everything. All the new programs, everything, full scholarships, job training, preventive care. He grinned. Even a new piano lab at the hospital. You're going to spoil these kids. Like you spoiled me? His eyes turned serious. When I was just another homeless man? Before she could answer, Andre called them over. He was teaching Maria Gonzalez's daughter a simple melody. Like this, he demonstrated. 5 fingers, 5 keys. She tried, hit a wrong note, winced. It's okay, Andre encouraged. Try again. Sarah watched them. The billionaire's son who'd lost everything to find himself. The nurse who'd risked her career for kindness. The boy who'd kept music alive in his heart through the hardest times. And the daughter of a woman whose tragedy had sparked transformation. All playing different parts of the same song. Her phone buzzed. The emergency room needed her, a big case coming in. Go, James said. We'll get Andre home. You sure? That's what family does. She hurried back to the hospital, her hospital, where every patient now got the care they deserved. Not because of money or status, but because they were human. The emergency room was controlled chaos when she arrived. A big accident on the expressway. Ms. Williams, a nurse called. We need more beds. Use the private wing, she ordered. No one questioned it. The walls between departments had fallen here too. Hours later, when the crisis passed, Sarah stood in the quiet hospital corridor. Through a window, she saw the Bronx waking up to another day. Her phone had several messages. From Andre, stayed late to help clean up. Mr. T's teaching me a new piece. From James, board proposals approved. Ready when you are. From William, thank you for everything. And one from Mrs. Rodriguez. Eduardo's checkup clear. God bless you. Sarah walked to the community room. The portable keyboards were lined up, waiting for tomorrow's classes. She touched one key, hearing the clear note ring out. Like Andre said, 5 fingers, 5 keys. Start there. Start with one person who needs help. Start with one rule. Everyone matters. Start with one note. And slowly, steadily, change the song. Outside her window, the Bronx continued its morning rhythm. Sirens and songs, struggles and triumphs, all part of the city's endless melody. But here, in this room, in this hospital, something had shifted. A new song was playing, one of healing, of justice, of transformation. And Sarah Williams, once just a nurse trying to help a homeless man, stood in the middle of it all, ready for whatever note came next. Because that's what changemakers do. They keep playing, they keep helping, they keep believing that every life has value, every soul can sing, and every broken thing can be made whole again. One patient at a time, one policy at a time, one note at a time. until the whole world joins the song.